All right. Good evening, good day, good afternoon, whenever you're joining us. Hey, everybody. My name is Darren Calhoun. I serve on the board here at Q Christian Fellowship, and I'm part of our equity, diversity, and inclusion gatherings, where myself, along with others like Carrie and a few others, are helping Q Christian Fellowship to look at equity, diversity, and inclusion both as an institution and how we are working to make sure that that's lived out, as well as how it looks in our community. And so these gatherings are monthly gatherings, currently on the first Sunday of the month, where we hold this space for folks who are interested in learning and discussing and being in community with others who are growing in the same way. And so tonight we have a very, very special kind of format where rather than being in small group discussions, we are going to have a fishbowl conversation. And fishbowls are intended to be a space where you hear the more informal insider conversation, where people who have maybe shared or lived experience are talking to each other just like you would maybe at a cafe on a Sunday. And the rest of us are invited to be active listeners in that conversation. The chat is always open for you to talk amongst yourselves or to react. But the conversation today won't feature like questions and answers or other things. Instead, this will be a conversation to just make sure that some of the groups and experiences that may be made invisible in larger groups, to make sure we hear those voices and we get a chance to see what's happening in those lives. Yeah, we typically have a few ground rules, and so just for the sake of those who see, these are some of the ways that we typically gather. But tonight, let's get into defining a few terms, and I'll hand it to Carrie.
Thank you. So this slide has an image of a person who is half colored in the asexual flag colors and half colored in the aromantic flag colors, and it is a drawing of a person. On the left side, we have two definitions. The first is asexual, someone who does not experience sexual attraction, and the second is aromantic, someone who does not experience or desire romanticism.
Yep. And so we have a cartoon or illustration that headlines with aromantic is not equal to asexual. And so building on those two previous definitions, it shows the pride colors or the flag colors of aromantic and asexual people, and reminds us that one can be aromantic and asexual. That is, they may have no romantic attraction as well as no sexual attraction. And there's lots of gray area in between there as well.
So this slide has three additional definitions. Allosexual, which is someone who has sexual attraction to others. And that can be a range as well. And inside that range, there is gray sexual, someone who occasionally experiences sexual attraction, but usually does not, or demisexual, someone who is sexually attracted to another or others based on strong emotional connection. And gray sexual and demisexual are typically kind of smaller categories or smaller identifications inside the asexual community.
And one of the things that I thought was really important for us in starting to name some of the specific language is that we move away from what you might hear in some other spaces as what's normal, and that's in air quotes. Allosexual is probably the word that people are reaching for when they say normal, or what may be better described as typical attractions. But humans are created in diverse and wonderful ways, and so all of our stuff is normal, and we just want to make sure that we have language to describe that in ways that is more inclusive. So as we talk about our sexual attitudes, this is another important piece of what we're looking at. So some people are sex averse, and that means someone who is on the asexual spectrum and averse to or extremely disinterested in sex or sexual behavior. Sex indifferent, someone who feels indifferent or neutral about sex or sexual behavior. Sex repulsed, someone who is repulsed by or extremely disinterested in sex or sexual behavior.
Thank you. So this next slide comes from Everyday Feminism. It was made by a creator separate from that organization and then was brought into an article, which you can see here. And I'll pop the link in the chat as well. I'll put the image description in the chat, but I'm actually going to go ahead and read through it as folks are encountering the image. So there's a phrase at the top that says myth, asexuality equals celibacy. And under that, there's a graphic of a person who says asexuality and celibacy are two entirely different things. One is the willful choice to abstain from sexual activity due to either religious or personal beliefs, that's referring to celibacy, while the other is an orientation and not a choice, which is referring to asexuality. Below this on the graphic is a series of nondescript people. The first one all the way on the left is titled with celibacy, saying, "I took a vow of chastity." Next to that person is another person who looks similar. They're standing under the title abstinence and they are blushing, and they say, "I'm waiting for the right person." And then on the right-hand side, the last person is an image of a person smiling and holding a pride poster with a triangle on it under the title asexuality.
Right. And so for tonight, we'll get into our discussion and into our fishbowl conversation. So here's some tips or some advice for how to engage in this kind of experience in a way that would be useful. One of my favorite things to encourage people to do is to approach with curiosity. Sometimes we have kind of a reactive way of when we hear some new information or we hear something that maybe sits in a very different place from what we've known or experienced in the past, we may want to immediately say something or we may want to immediately respond or question. That's great. And how I encourage you to do that is to do it in writing, to write it down, or if you're somebody who uses voice notes, to record it. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll all stay on mute in the room other than the speakers. And at a later gathering, or if you want to email us, we're always welcome to do that as well if you still need some more processing time. Listen for unspoken aspects, agree, disagree, identify synchronicities and note differences. One of the things that's always important is to remember that no single person speaks for an entire group. All of our experiences and perspectives are our own. And so we've done our best to make sure we have a diversity of experiences here tonight, but even as there are subject matter experts on their own lives, there are still others who have differing ideas and opinions as well. So it's fine to look for those, to listen for them. Let's also embrace new experiences with understanding and with patience. This may be a new format for you, so give it a try. Maybe you don't like it. That's okay. We have lots more gatherings to come. And if nothing else, it's a great time to hear or see or experience the stories of some of your siblings who are part of the Q Christian Fellowship community. Lastly, questions can be saved for later or emailed to equity@qchristian.org for answers and future discussions. We really do build the programming for these gatherings based on the feedback from those who show up. And so we invite you to engage with us, talk to us, send us an email, and myself or Carrie will get back to you and we'll talk about what's to come. So with that, I'm going to just quickly introduce. In fact, I'll let our speakers introduce themselves even better, and we can maybe go in picture order. So Dee, you're up, and tell us about who you are and where you come from.
That's a really big question for an opener.
I like big messy questions.
Yeah. Hi, I go by Dee. That is a placeholder of a name for now. So my pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I'm from Brooklyn, New York, born and raised. I've been part of Q Christian for about 6 years, since 2017. I am asexual, aromantic, assigned female, trans, and I'm glad to have the chance to speak to you all tonight.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us, Dee. I'm looking forward to it. And Van, you ready?
Hi, my name is Nervous. Um, I'm actually not great at public speaking, but my name is Vaughn. I've been part of Q Christian or doing stuff with them since I think 2019 is when I attended the first conference that I went to. I am originally from Northern Virginia, and I moved up to New York City, and I live in Brooklyn now with my partner Allyn, who's also here. My pronouns are he, they. Um, and I am just very queer. Like it's just kind of all over. I make jokes about being a AAA threat, like ace, aro, agender, but I'm also like kind of a combination of, but like I fall all over the spectrum. Like I also have identified as demisexual. I still do in many ways, and I'm excited to talk a lot about that in particular.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And lastly, Allyn.
Also, don't let him fool you. He's great at public speaking, even if he's nervous. Hi, I'm Allyn. My pronouns are they, them. I also live in Brooklyn and have lived in New York State pretty much my entire life. Vaughn and I first attended a QCF conference together. I believe it was 2019. That was the year it was in Chicago. That was also where we met Dee, and have kind of continued to participate in various QCF activities and groups. And something that Vaughn failed to mention is the two of us actually helped write the aromantic and asexual curriculum for community groups, which QCF continues to use. So that was something that we were very privileged to help do. And I'm also excited to get to talk about some of those things with you guys tonight. I am asexual, aromantic, as well as non-binary.
Coolness. And again, thank you all for being here and being willing to share your lives. One of the things that I can't stress enough, as if I don't have lots of things to keep saying to people, is that people don't owe us their lives. They don't owe us the intimate details of who they are and what their experiences are. So I really consider it a gift when people decide to share with us and invite us into their stories. So hopefully we all hold these stories as sacred and honor them as such. And let's get into it. Does that sound good? Cool. And feel free to be unmuted to our speakers. We're like I said, we're just gonna have a good old fun conversation.
I guess. I was just observing how the blur just like nerfs my hair because it kind of blends into the background. I'm like, oh, I got a haircut. Okay.
Right.
Because I usually do hide self-view when I'm on Zoom, just because I don't really need to look at myself, but I can't do that when I'm pinned.
It's super distracting. I like notice every tick and every twitch.
Like I'm just gonna look at somebody else.
Right. Yeah, I think you can at least rearrange people on the screen so that someone else is in the middle. I'll smile at you the whole time, I promise.
Just talk to Darren. It will be fine.
Yeah.
Yes. So we did describe a little bit of your experiences. But I always love origin stories for heroes. So would anybody like to share like what your journey has been like? What is your this is me moment, or when you donned your cape and said, I'm going to be on the A spectrum?
I mean, I'm happy to go first. I'm always willing to take the plunge and go first, kind of volunteer myself. So I wouldn't have had the vocabulary to describe my experiences at the time, but I can identify having my experience as an asexual person into like beginning of high school. I would always feel like I wasn't connecting to this idea of like people wanting to date, like the whole like boy meets girl narrative that's I think especially projected onto young people. And dating wasn't really something I was interested in, and I didn't really look at my peers with any particular kind of attraction or interest in that whatsoever. And a lot of my friends would always kind of like respond with confusion when I would like bring that narrative up that I wasn't connecting to. And even into college, I remember like having very distinct conversations with people who are trying to convince to me or explain to me like the kinds of attractions that I should have to people, the kinds of like things that I should be interested in. And I know for me, some of that experience, I had a hard time telling if I was just like, oh, I was raised in the church, so maybe I'm just a little bit prudish and maybe there's something that I need to learn here. Or if it was just like me not being interested. So I first got introduced to the vocabulary of asexuality on Tumblr in 2011 when I first made an account. And I have this very distinct moment of remembering reading this article, someone describing what asexuality is and what the experience was like. And I was like, there's a word for that. There's like a thing, like people, like I really resonated with it. And I was like shocked that for the first time, I didn't feel othered by someone's response to my experience. And I think it took me a while to process some of that and before I actually started identifying myself as someone who is asexual. But I feel like that was like a very distinct moment for me. I was about 21 at the time, where I was like introduced to the idea of asexuality, and it immediately meant something to me because I had something that described how my experience was different from the people around me.
Yeah, Tumblr really has been the savior on so many levels for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
It's like,
I
regardless of how you feel about the way that Tumblr has moved, like I will always be grateful for the type of community that Tumblr has enabled, because that was such a big moment for me. And like, and on Tumblr, I don't think I would have learned as much as I did about asexuality or about other types of identities if I hadn't had access to Tumblr.
Totally. Anybody else want to feel like sharing?
Sure. So my first introduction to the term asexuality dates several years before I ever really identified with it. And those of us of a certain age may remember AOL Instant Messenger. And I had a friend for some reason, and I sort of, you know, we were acquaintances, and in his profile, just like in like bold letters, just had the definition for asexuality for no reason. I had no idea what this meant. I had never talked to him about it. And I remember being like, that's weird. Who's like that? And I have this very distinct memory of a conversation I had with someone in 2004, right around the election. And we were talking about marriage equality. And I said to them, like, maybe I just don't get it because I've never like really fallen in love with someone that much to like want to marry them. And like years later, I look back on that and I was like, how did I not know?
I have things like that too, where like I'll look back. I remember being on the playground in kindergarten and thinking about like what my ideal like future would be. And it was something like living in an apartment like with my best friend, and like we had a cat. Like not, but marriage or like having a kind of like romantic relationship wasn't at all what like factored into it. And then, like years later, I'm like sitting in my apartment in New York with Vaughn and our cat, and I'm like, I think I made it.
Yeah. And then some like 5-6 years later, I cannot even remember what was the incident that like set this off. I like went down an internet rabbit hole, found AVEN, the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network. Their website is asexuality.org. Very easy to remember. And like there's a huge portion of the ace community that like lives on the internet. So Tumblr, AVEN, and is where so many folks find their community. And I guess I encountered the definition again and started reading more and more things. And it like, again, like Allyn said, like it just made sense. Like everything slid right in, it clicked, and there's that light bulb moment. And I often say that I came out late in life. So I came out to myself like 24, 25. And I'm mad about that. And I think it's because of the years that I spent in the church where we were told like the purity culture that we were taught was to say this, this, and this. And, it wasn't difficult for me to not date. It wasn't difficult for me to not have like so-called impure thoughts or whatever. And so I was like, well, this isn't this normal, and there's that word again, normal. And then the other thing that I recognize is that like, I never understood what other people's internal experience was. So in the church, like no one ever talked about even like what normal sexuality should look like. Right. It was just a whole series of no's, like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And then like, when you do, it should be amazing, but don't talk about it anyway. And I use a phrase like, you can't see what's not there. So I didn't recognize like I'm going to put in air quotes, lack of a thing, because I didn't realize I needed to recognize a lack of a thing.
Really just seconding both, like that's especially like, because I know that Al and I have made this joke a million times, but it's just like the gif, what, like it's hard about like not about abstinence. As somebody who grew up in the church, I also like didn't realize that anything was like weird about me. I was just like, oh, I must just have incredibly strong fortitude, or like, I don't know, sex is not a big deal. Like
just a really good Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Just a really good Christian. And then when around the same time that Al was learning about asexuality, I was too on Tumblr as well. And I heard about the phrase demisexual in particular. And it was like the idea that you don't really experience sexual attraction to somebody until you've known them for a long period of time, and that you've like formed a close relationship with them. And that really was like strongly like something I related to. I was like, oh, because I've had like a sexual interest in maybe 2 people my whole life. And those people are Allyn and a guy that I had known since I was like literally born. So that's about it. So like, and both of those are people, and they were both people that are really, really close to me. And so I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's it. Demisexual. And since then it's been an exciting ride around with that particular phrase. I feel like I feel much more like I'm more ace than I am. Like I identify more with the ace experience than I do with others. But in any case, like once I realized that, I was like, oh, that explains a lot. And then the other thing that occurred to me, like then I told my mom. So I was like, I think I'm asexual. And apparently my mom has talked to my brother since then and been like, your sister thinks that she's asexual, and I don't know what that means, but that's just really ridiculous, and that's just normal. And I've just been running around going, Mom, you are too. Like, I'm almost positive.
Who's gonna tell her? Yeah. Who's gonna tell her?
Anyway.
But yeah, no, I think some of the earliest conversations we had was when I was talking to you about being ace. And did I introduce you to the idea of asexuality initially, or had you seen stuff before that?
But I remember talking about it late at night, and you were really stressing about it. That's what I remember.
Oh yeah, because this was like maybe a few months after we'd met, because I met Vaughn that same year, that because I was 21 at the time when we met.
Yeah,
and I was still kind of processing my own journey and about whether or not I could identify as asexual.
And to be clear, like I found out about all of this when I was 27. Up until that point, I'd been saying like I'm straight, a little bit bi, and like because I was like, oh, I like kissing girls, and then eventually realized that maybe I like that because I'm just bi. Like I said, I'm very queer, so like it's just kind of all over the place. I did want to mention this was something that Dee had written down when we were early talking about doing this as a group. I just wanted to mention that it is true that all 3 of us are ace, aro, and some form of not cis, and there are lots of people out there that are just ace, just aro, and like you can be like or like gray or like any of the gray sexualities or gray romanticism. It's just like the spectrum, and these things are not necessarily coupled to each other. It just so happens that the 3 of us all have both of those as a thing, as well as being not cis. So
yeah, when I got involved in the local like asexual meetup group, that is when I met a bunch of other folks with a variety of different experiences, including like trans folks and non-binary folks. And the way that I describe it is that like once you start throwing out the rules, like all the other rules start getting thrown out too. And so like a couple, like not too long into it, like my gender identity just started to crumble. And it was because of being around other folks that like were able to share their experiences. And, you know, for them to also be asexual on the asexual spectrum meant that like I understood this part of them too. And so like when I hear more about their gender experience, I was like, oh no. And back to what Vaughn was saying earlier, there's a part of me that is like terrified that I'm gonna find out I'm demi. Because you don't know until you know. Right?
That needs to be a t-shirt.
It's
You
so
don't know until you know.
yes, I
Right.
had
And I just can't have my like identity like upended a third time.
No.
Like in this way. And just like, and so like in many ways, like aromantic is the best, easiest term for me to use, but in all likelihood, I'm also like, to get really specific would be like to say like gray, demi, pan, romantic or something. But I find that aromantic is a label that I like to hold better. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could, because it's been mentioned twice already, 3 times really in one way or another. There's this thing where the church wants us to be sexless creatures, but also to be sexful creatures. And it's 1,000,001 rules about it. And I know in my own experience, I was very publicly abstinent for a season. And I was specific about using the word abstinent, which conservatives read as celibate and as other folks read as just waiting till marriage. And it was just a whole big public hoopla. I would really love to hear about what that was like, because I know I had my own experiences of people kind of prioritizing me when it came to my relationship with women, because it was like, he's the perfect man. And at the same time, people being suspicious of me because of my same-sex attraction or me being gay. And I also felt like I was easier in some spaces to accept as gay because I was publicly abstinent. But again, these are my experiences. I'm really, really curious to hear about what it's been like for you, because I'm just gonna, show my hand as like, I don't think churches are very good towards ace and aro folks either.
No, I mean, I just kind of want to speak to something that you said about like folks treating you with suspicion. And I was never out as an ace or aro person when I was in like the church that I grew up in, which would have been like a very non-affirming, like evangelical, like Assemblies of God church. So like this was still me as a teenager kind of exploring aspects of my identity. But I had one friend that I have a very distinct kind of narrative that goes along with this. So I have always been like a very loyal person when it comes to friendship, and I would always like throw myself in very, very much when I would connect with people, because that friendship has always been something that has been at the center of my relationships. Like this is always something that I've prioritized and still is. So I was showing a lot of affection to this friend because that's what I did. And one day she came to me and said that God had told her in a dream that I was a lesbian and that she couldn't be friends with me as a result. And so we kind of like weren't as close after that. And to me, like I was really hurt because I felt like it kind of like came out of nowhere. There was a part of me that was still kind of exploring things. I'm like, am I a lesbian? Because I know I'm not attracted to guys, but I don't really feel like I'm attracted to girls. But I'm told that I should have friendships with girls. And then you get into the gender essentialism and gender roles that were taught, not only like in the church, but in the church, like very specifically in this particular instance. And so that was really hurtful to me. And she did end up at one point like apologizing to me later in like tears and realizing that that was like a really harmful thing for her to do. But it really brought a lot of questions to me through the lens of kind of like what you were saying about like when people look at you with suspicion, it's like you're told that, well, you're not supposed to have like heterosexual friendships because you're supposed to be putting up this like wall of purity. And so it encourages this intimacy with friendships with like people of the same gender. I'm going to be talking about this in very gender essentialist terms, but no, this is not my perspective anymore. I'm just having difficulty reaching for words. So we're supposed to, and like encouraging these same-sex friendships, but only so far up to the point where it's become socially acceptable for then you to start looking for a partner, or you should be giving certain kinds of affection only towards like a romantic or sexual partner. And then it becomes weird. And then the walls start to come down. And then people are like, well, why aren't you acting in the way that I expect you to?
Yeah.
When I was a teenager into college, I sort of embraced the so-called spiritual gift of singleness. It was sort of wrapped up in a bunch of other things that I identified with, and in fact, like I've since sort of let that go, and it was I started like talking about it quite a bit, and I would encounter these like very well-meaning church ladies, and I would say these things, and they're like, "Oh, that's great for you," and then they were like, "That's exactly how I was before I met my husband," and I was like, it's not what I'm saying.
And for clarity, was this like, did you feel like this was a life-giving kind of calling feeling during that time to feel like you were called to singleness?
It was wrapped into a lot of my other like identities within the church and within like my career path.
Gotcha.
And then it also was like, honestly, like a way to explain the confusion that I had.
Yeah.
Right. And I also have had a series of weirdly close platonic friendships that people saw in the church and misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Right. And so then also like this, like, and I do the same thing now, except I use a different word, right? I would throw out this term singleness as a way to be very, very clear, like, this is where I'm going with this, and this is what I intend. And like from the outside, people looking at me and a friend, like always like paired those together. And I was like, no, like, why would you assume that? And it was also like, I felt judged somehow that I had like ulterior motives. And so I do still do that a little bit, but only in the sense that like I'm outspoken and loud about being ace. Like it's like the second thing you'll learn about me if you meet me, and I will, talk about it for hours. But it does, like, for me, it helps set expectations because when you don't have that and you don't talk about it, like people get hurt. And since coming out, I've actually gone back to some of these old friends and like apologized, or just have been like, hey, like, I didn't know this. It was very confusing, I think, for both of us. And now I know this better. And I wish I could have known it before. Yeah.
I like, I guess when I was like, I dated a lot of guys. Actually, I did a lot of dating. Because I don't know how to say no. And a lot of guys are like, you're cute. You want to date? And I was like, yeah, I'm really flattered by your attention. And about 3 weeks into it, I'm like, I'm bored. I'm very bored. I do not care. And I don't know how to stop because I also can't tell you I want to break up. So I was in a lot of mess of relationships, and I did not treat people right because I didn't know how to get out of it. And like, I just, like, being honest was not my forte. So, I mean, like, again, this is all very long past, but yeah, I made a lot of mistakes in that respect. I very much had the impression growing up that it was like, well, of course I'm going to get married and have kids. That's my job. There was, and it's like, and I like kids, but like the idea of getting married was not that exciting to me, but it was like getting married was the prerequisite to having kids. So therefore, there would be no kids if I wasn't married. So therefore it was like, so that was like kind of tied up in my feelings on the whole thing. But I never met anybody that I was really that excited about, honestly, until Al. And like the and part of it's that I didn't really start discovering myself in full, like D. My gender like concept, like I saw myself as just like there was no other option than cis woman, so like it never even occurred to me that it could be something else. And then from the ace aroness stuff, kind of like that started crumbling my idea of my gender, but I didn't know what it was. I think I would have said genderqueer for a really long time, and I think that still works. Like, you're gonna be like, wow, this guy's got like 20 different identities. Yeah, I do. I'm queer.
I mean, we all do.
Yeah.
And when I talk to folks and I try to explain some of these things, they're like, oh, I've never thought of my gender that way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, talking to a fish about what is water. Like they've never had to question it because the thing that they've been told and what the society has been telling them and like sort of fits. So they've never had to feel that discomfort. And maybe it doesn't fit entirely, but it fits enough that like they don't have to question it. And then for those of us who had to question it, we have to hunt for like the language and the community. And one of the things we haven't talked about just yet is that like in the ace and aro community, we have a ton of like more and more specific labels, right? So we talked about gray and demi, but we have like a bunch more. And it's because people read that definition and they go like, well, that's not really how I feel, or that's not really my experience. I have this other thing. So like, well, people talk about like romantic attraction and sexual attraction, but there's also like aesthetic attraction, which is a different thing. And there's also like, like a intellectual attraction. And for a lot of people, maybe all of their attractions sort of funnel into like the same bucket, like the people that they're like sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to and aesthetically attracted to are all the same type of people. So they've never had to like splinter that apart. And then folks who have, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't work. And so we start developing more and more terms. And then allosexual people are like, why do you need so many labels? And I really like the term allosexual because allo means like other, like on the side of. And so I'm like, yeah, it's your turn to be othered. Like
I know that there's a lot of people in the queer community like that are not ace that actually get upset about that term because they're like, oh, you're lumping us in with our oppressors. And to that I'd say we are all ultimately both on both sides in different ways for the most part. Like almost all of us. Like I'm white, okay? Like that makes me like you're like that. I share that with cis straight people who are white, okay? In that respect, I have privilege. Like that doesn't go away. And so like the idea that you can never be lumped in with, it's like, I'm sorry, but we all fit lots of different boxes. That's how it is. That's the reason why throwing out boxes as much as possible is great within reason. But in that but like for me, like I guess as far as like my Christianity goes, like I always felt very much connected to God. So that was never really a question for me. And my mom just had these assumptions about what my life would look like that I never really like was a problem per se. But definitely always the energy of you need to be ace. You should be ace, and ace is good until it's not, which is the point at which you've met the guy that you're going to be with for the rest of your life, and you're going to have babies, and it's going to be great. And but I never reached that point. And honestly, like, and again, I'm pretty sure my mom's on this, like, also on the ace spectrum, even if she won't acknowledge it. From everything she's told me, that makes me like my part of the reason why my experiences felt so like this is normal is because what my mom relayed to me sounds a lot like the experiences of people who are ace and demi. Like looking back at like the things I learned, I'm like, yeah, just that's so I thought that was just Christianity. I thought that was just Christian womanhood. And that's what my mom thinks, is that that's just Christian womanhood. Like all women just aren't, mom thinks all women are ace basically. And she has no idea. So
I love that that both you and Dee named this act of describing, this act of, people, I've seen people be very reactive when it comes to, well, there's too many labels and there's too many boxes. And it's like, what if we're just describing things? Like, we don't say there's too many colors, right? I could burst into singing Joseph and Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat about his coat of many colors, and it's like, fawn, what color is fawn? Like, but nobody's going, well, we need to just use red, or we just need to use green. It's like, yes, you can be general and say red, or you could be specific and say chartreuse, if I could even say the word. But all of these are ways to be more specific about this beautiful, indescribable billions of colors that we can just see with our human eyes, right? There's still colors we can't see. We're just finding out that animals can see UV colors that we didn't know the whole time. They've been seeing all kinds of designs and patterns on birds' wings that we're like, what? In 2023, we're just finding this out. And so I love that there's this conversation of describing and finding words for, and how significant that is, and even how for people in past and prior generations, sometimes they just didn't have words. They didn't have a script, right? You said being cis and being assigned female at birth was the only thing available to you until you found out that there was something else, and it wasn't that there was an agenda. to take away gender, to take away romanticism, to take away sexuality, but it's just I'm hearing that you found a way to describe yourself.
The importance of words to describe things is such that we actually do not see things until we can describe them in some cases. There are words in other languages that we don't have in English. There's one that's like for like the short side of a hill in a language that's like, it's like Dutch or something. I don't remember. It's a Nordic language. But like, I never looked at hills and thought, oh, there's a short side and a long side, but there is, and you would notice it because that's part of your language. And that's important because of the sheep herding that would go on, but but naming it is what makes it visible and makes it important. And so that's the reason why I think we have such a strong desire to have labels that are specific, especially in a space where so many of us are rendered invisible by people that don't want to acknowledge that we exist, people that the ways that we throw off people's expectations of the like in the same way that bisexuality throws people's idea of like, you have to pick like off. Aceness does the same thing because we're not picking anything. Aroness does the same thing because, and like that's why like picking nothing and picking all can be very similar in certain respects. And so we like and I feel like part of the reason we enjoy finding labels in these spaces in particular that are very specific is because we feel so unseen. So finding the right words to say who we are is very valuable.
Yeah. And I'll never play devil's advocate because he can advocate for himself. I will invite you, however, to talk maybe just respond to people who say, well, if you're ace and aro, how can you be in a partnership?
Vaughn and I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah. I'm just gonna jump.
Do you have something you want to say about that?
I just want to preface this with, we were both really exploring identities when we first started to be with each other. And one of the things that we have wrestled with throughout it is, what do our identities look like? And what does that mean for us as a partnership? Like, especially Al's identity is aromantic. Like, I'm aromantic as well, but like it takes a different form. I'm more romantic with Al than I'm demi-romantic might be the right phrase. But for Al, it's even more like aromanticism had a big effect on our relationship in some ways. So,
and specifically to the people that that would question the validity of a relationship that is, I'm watching the camera, not believe that I'm talking and wondering what's up with Zoom. Question the validity of a relationship where both people happen to be aromantic or asexual. I want to bring to mind the many other ways that we feel connected with people in relationships. Like Dee mentioned earlier, aesthetic attraction, as well as, platonic attraction is something that people can talk about. And then there's like intellectual attraction, all these other different things that we can be attracted to people. And one of the other terms that I've been thinking about earlier is like relational eroticism, where it's like something that's erotic doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, and like the feeling of having like an erotically intimate relationship with someone, where like the intimacy is something that goes beyond what we in our minds understand as like, I hate using the term just friendship because there's a lot of baggage behind that term, but like when people try to dismiss a connection as like just something, try to like put it into a box that they can understand and kind of like close it off, instead of opening it up to something transcendent, something that can be more, and maybe is a more that they don't understand. I know Vaughn and I have had a lot of back and forth about trying to figure out, well, what is our relationship? What is a label that we can use to describe the level of relational intimacy that we have with each other, even though we're not necessarily romantically attracted to one another, and even though we're not necessarily sexually attracted to one another, but this is still a relationship that is a high priority and has a lot of emotional investment and pull and weight and feeling. And I think that's something that we haven't quite been able to answer sufficiently yet. We've gone through like different terms that people have tried using, like there's been a rise in popularity of the term queer platonic partnership from certain aspects of the asexual and aromantic community, which is not a term that I'm very fond of because I feel like it lacks in certain ways, but some people do feel like that describes their relationships. I know like Vaughn and I would be going into like different like fantasy worlds or like sci-fi worlds, trying to like pull from different like words that people have come up with. Like in the Star Trek universe, there's a word Tahila, which describes like a deep, intimate friendship, which is another one that we resonated with. But there hasn't really been a word that fits. And I think that also kind of pulls on like what Vaughn was saying about like the needing to name something in order for it to be visible, in order for people to believe that it's something that's real. And this is something that isn't even a continuing struggle for us. But I think in a similar way that like Dee was talking about, gosh, what was it? Just kind of pulling on the idea of like opening yourself up to different things. I've started to like notice this very strong kinship between my identity as an aromantic person and hearing the experience of polyamorous people, which on the surface you would think like these are two very different identities, but there's this synergy there of opening yourself up to letting different people fulfill your emotional needs. Like it's not going into the funnel. That's what it was. The funnel that like maybe allosexual people understand of like every one person can fill all of these different kinds of emotional needs for you. But instead opening yourself up to the idea that we are made for community and we don't need to have one specific person to fill these very specific like emotional needs. So that was something that I think this past QCF conference, I went to the polyamorous affinity gathering because I was kind of questioning myself at the time. I'm like, is this something that like I can identify with? And it's been such an interesting like dialogue, not only with myself, but from other people, to like see the connection that these two very different experiences have in uplifting a very diverse and expansive understanding of relationships and intimacy.
Just an anecdote here. In 2019, we did a breakout session, which was a panel on sexual ethics at QCF. And I was on that as well. And I always get the feeling that people assume they know what I'm going to talk about when I talk about sexual ethics. We'll come back to that. But we were all sitting in a row, and I found myself between the two poly people. And over and over and over again during the conversation, we would look at each other and be like, wait, me too, like us too, right? So the question of like, how can you be in a relationship, or how can an ace person be in a relationship with an allo person, is the answer is exactly the same as how poly relationships work, which is like, assume nothing, communicate very well, and like enthusiastic consent, right? That's how you make it work, is that you so I feel like so many folks have a formula in their mind of what a partnership looks like, and if you don't check off all those boxes, there's something wrong with that partnership. Right?
And I'm gonna just jump in here and like get a slightly TMI. Al and I, our relationship is not celibate. Okay, like we have a sexual relationship, and I mention this because I don't think either of us, like, I've experienced sexual attraction to Al, and whenever I do, it's kind of like it's like having my hair blown back like every time, because like it really is rare. Like, this is what I'm saying when I talk about like the like demisexuality is more similar to ace, because the moments at which I'm experiencing sexual attraction to another human being, it's like, oh my gosh, am I dying? My heart is going so fast. And then it's like, oh no, I'm having a moment of being like, wow, Al's hot. But I'm often aesthetically attracted to them. But both of us have sexual drive, but not necessarily directed towards each other. And so like we both fulfill our sexual interest with each other because we love each other, but it isn't necessarily because we're attracted to each other. That's a way that like a relationship between two people that are not sex averse, who are like ace, may, for example, take shape. It is also true that, of course, ace people can be, just as a record, like this is something that you'll see commonly talked about. A lot of asexual people are sex repulsed or sex averse, but you can also be not ace and sex averse or sex repulsed. Those things can often happen to people for lots of different reasons. And you can also be ace and not either of those things. And
I'd like to jump in and talk about that a little bit, because that was part of some of my navigation in trying to understand myself as an asexual person. Is this a label that I could use for myself? And for a long time, I would identify as gray ace, because I am a sex interested person. I guess sex curious might be the term, but like my interest in sexuality was never directed at real people or people that I knew. That was just like very much absent, even though I'm interested in learning about sex and the idea of sex and how it works and experiencing those things for myself. Those were all things that I was curious about. But like that energy was never connected to real people. And I think it took me understanding that to feel more comfortable using the term asexual for myself, because initially when I was doing a lot of reading, I feel like this is probably different now, because this was almost like 10, 12 years ago at this time. But a lot of the conversations around asexuality that were going on, even within the community, were focused on sex averse or sex repulsed or sex disinterested people. And there was difficulty for me trying to find the validity in there of like, oh, well, I don't identify with that specific experience. Can I even call myself asexual? Of course, I ended up coming to the conclusion of yes, but I think there's still the potentiality, I think, for people, especially outside of the queer community and outside the asexual community, to make assumptions about what the experience of an asexual person looks like. Because you hear asexual, you hear like not sexually attracted to people, and you're like, oh, okay, so you're frigid, you're a prude, you like all of these other sort of very negatively charged terms that we project onto people when you try to distance like a human from their sexuality. And for me, I've become like I'm very excited to talk about the intersection of sexuality and asexuality as that, because that's something that I experienced. And I think it's important for people to understand that it's not it doesn't come down to, oh, if I'm ace, you can't like touch anything sexual whatsoever. Like it's just off the table. Like it's not about that.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that we've named how consent is important in all relationships, right? Whether it's a sexual relationship or a platonic one, and how, especially, this is always this fun dynamic of how you find two groups that people assume are opposite, ace folks and poly folks, and say, oh, they're the exact opposite of blah, 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 blah. And then you find that this loop just comes right back around and they back into each other because people who are traditionally or typically monogamous have a script that's been presented to them that gives them a very specific set of actions and expectations and so forth, that, yeah, there may be some variance, but it essentially takes away, I'll say, in the society we live in, it takes away the opportunity to explore and define and describe what are my romantic attractions, my sexual attractions, my platonic or friendship attractions. What are the ways that I'm individually and uniquely oriented? That, again, when we're cis, we don't think about what our gender story is. When we're monogamous, we often don't think about what our relational story is. When we have a lot of other kind of nuanced things, it's not until we sit and listen to the experience of another that we actually find out what our story is. And then we're free to tell it, right? None of your experiences and none of the experiences we're describing today take away from, negate, or make less of other people's sexualities, other people's romanticisms. It's just to say, here's another experience, here's another way. And just like you said, we're trying to figure out relationships just like everybody else. We're trying to figure out what community is just like everyone else. And I should I'm like, I tend to talk from the weave because I'm like, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I don't experience or I don't describe or identify as ace or aro myself, but I do deeply resonate with the ways that this intentionality about our experiences is so insightful for all of us. And so, again, I'm so appreciative of what we're doing here. Did it look like you were about to say something?
Yeah, I had two different things. One of them was that one of those commonalities in that panel that I had with the poly folks is that the question was like, what do you wish people, what like misconception do you want to clear up about your community? And someone said, we're not recruiting. Like poly people are not determined to break up all monogamous relationships and make everybody be poly. Like,
I got an email. Somebody said it was on the gay agenda.
Right. And in the same way that like I feel like I talk to some folks and they feel judged. Mm-hmm. Like they feel like I'm judging their sexuality. And I'm like, no, I didn't say anything about you. I'm just trying to explain like what is my experience. And I will also say, like, sometimes we are recruiting a little bit, right? So, like, Vaughn's experience with his parent, like his mom, like, be like, one of these days she's going to maybe, hopefully, have that epiphany, because we want other people to know that, like, if they're uncomfortable in the script or the label that they've been using all of this time, then there's an alternative. And like, I love that light bulb moment. Like when you hand someone a flyer and they read the definition and they're like, wait a minute, that's me. And the next thing is like, they go like, I'm not broken. Like, this is who I am. And there are other people who feel this way. And there's a label for it and a community and a pride flag and like an entire internet like world that I have never known. So yeah, we are recruiting a little bit, but only if you want to be there.
Only if you want to be there.
Right. It's so true about the recruitment. And this is me being political and owning it as my own statement. Cis heterosexual folks do more recruitment for their team than anybody else, down to writing laws and outlawing others' experiences. So when it comes to this idea of recruitment, I think it's, again, I love this language of invitation. We're like, hey, there are some words that might be useful to you. You don't have to use them. They're just a little more specific. If you want to call things red, you can call them red, or you can call them fire oven or whatever. You know, it's you can be as specific as you want or not. I also a lot of times when we listen for stories from groups that don't get to be heard very much, we focus on all the negative stuff. And we've certainly talked a little bit about church stuff, and we've talked somewhat about family stuff. I'd love it if we could spend we probably have about 12 or so more minutes, if we could just talk at will about the joys, about the moments of feeling seen and heard and understood. What is your euphoria moments when it comes to the way that you experience or don't experience your attractions, or if I'm making sense, what feels good to you, or where do you feel best?
I mean, for me, it's getting to talk to other people who have similar experiences. Like the amount of validity that comes out of those kinds of conversations. Can you guys hear me right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My mic wasn't doing a thing. So. Can you hear me now?
Now we're getting the ASMR experience.
Oh man. that comes from learning and talking about other people about what they've been through and being like, yeah, me too. And that kind of thing, that for me always gives me just like such a sense of validity. But I'm also like an Enneagram 1, so that just kind of assuages my 4 stress a little bit. Like, yeah, my experience makes sense.
One of the things that I love about ACE people is, and it's similar to what I was saying earlier, we start breaking all the rules. So like as a community and individually, we like redefine all sorts of things that we've been handed as a script. So we redefine relationships, like sexual relationships or partnerships. We redefine what family means. Mm-hmm. We redefine what parenting and co-parenting means, because the model that is available to us doesn't really work. And we, maybe need to find a different one. I have a group of friends that, we have these big dreams of like buying a giant house together and filling it with us, our queer friends and our foster kids and our rescue pets. And that is how we find our families. And it's funny because when I talk about this dream, there are a lot of queer folks who get behind it and they're like, oh, that sounds really cool. I would love that too. Most of the people who don't get it are kind of turned off by it are straight folks. And it makes me a little sad. Mm-hmm. Right. Because then they're like, well, I only want to be in a house with like my 2.5 kids and a picket fence. I'm like, no, we can have so much more. And then you have, the founder of AVEN, his name is David J. He co-parents with a couple, a heterosexual couple, I guess. And they had a baby, and before they had that baby, they like had a whole conversation together, and he became their third parent. He has a partner as well that is outside of the co-parenting relationship. His relationship with the co-parents is not sexual. He is their third parent, and like also like, not that we need this validity, but like is written in the like birth certificate and like legally recognized by the state of California. And I love that because he found a way to become a parent without having to break up his partnership with someone who didn't want to be a parent. And without having to go through a unfriendly system, right? Because like adoption is unfriendly to single parents, single men. And if you hear them talk about it, they're like, it's great having 3 parents instead of 2, because when the baby is up all night, you have a third person who can help out. They're like, why not have more people who could be a part of this baby's life? Mm-hmm.
Just this whole idea of queering family and queering friendships and relationships and just like queering community, because like I feel like queering always means there's more. There's so much more than we've been taught or told or given the expectation that there is. And it's just this beautiful expansiveness of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive and to love and to have connections with people.
One of the like on that note, I'm going to get political for just a moment and just say that the whole concept of like the nuclear family and being the only legitimate family unit is absolutely a white colonial straight cis lie. And like that's something that's also coming out of marketing and all sorts of other things. There's like you'd be amazed by what's shaping your life, just because we haven't known much else in some ways, and here in America in particular. So apart from that, though, I think that a lot of different queer forms, but aceness in my case, and in many of our, sounds like all of our cases, is like specifically the way in which we've kind of learned about how, like, all of our labels are so important, but also so, like, in an ideal world would become meaningless, because we would all be free to love and be loved and raise as groups, as communities, and to not be limited by artificially created rules that a lot of people feel like they really must adhere to in order to feel safe. Because in an ideal world, we'd all be safe and feel loved by God, and know that they deeply love us, and that we therefore have nothing to fear about whatever's going on, as long as we're being kind to one another and loving one another. So anyway, that's my opinion. But I get
love the
joy.
abundant worldview.
I've really loved revisiting Paul through the lens of asexuality, which I will never stop talking about. I just find if you look at Paul's stuff about like how he's like, I'll have to get married. I think marriage is dumb. I don't understand why you guys are all like obsessing over this.
Maybe,
yeah. Because like I guess you can do this, and I'm just like, he's like, I was blessed by God with no need for this kind of thing, and I'm like, you sir are a salty ace, and you have no idea. So you're just
grumpy.
running around being like, I'm much more superior than all of you sexual people. It's like, dude, stop. Okay, but
Stop it. And then all these people
Toxic purity culture, Paul.
All these people are asking him questions about what to do in their relationships and their marriages, and like, should we marry? Should we not marry? And he's like, why do you have to talk about this? I don't care. But if you must know, and then he gives them rules, and like he clearly like is not into it.
Yeah, he's literally like, this is my opinion. Like,
if you, it's like kind of if you really
well, since you ask.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, so that's given me a lot of joy. I think that's probably one of my greatest joy. Like as far as like being a Christian and like being ace, it's just been going back and looking at and reading all of Paul through the lens of him being ace. Honestly, just like, first of all, it takes a lot of pressure off of your cis relationships, even, your cis straight relationships, because you're like, remember, this guy doesn't even think this stuff's important. He's like, why are you doing this? Also taking a feminist lens to him in general is also fascinating. The Making of Biblical Womanhood is a really interesting book on that point. And then the other thing that I have enjoyed is looking for ace characters in media. They're often not human. I realize that can be a downside for some people, but I really enjoy the Murderbot series, in which the main character is an it who is very sex repulsed, romance repulsed. It does not want to have anything to do with that. It is a cyborg construct, so it's like part human, part machine kind of thing. And then like there's other series out there that I really enjoy, like the Imperial Rat series, which is from the point of view of a ship that has now in the body of a human, and also is aro and does not understand why people would be interested in any of those things. Things like that. Just it's fun to find them. They are not as I guess common as we might want, but also just finding characters that like can experience love and happiness and affection without it being romantic necessarily, or sexual. So
Hot take. Elsa from Frozen.
I mean, there's a reason that a lot of people really like put that label on her. I've only seen the first Frozen movie, so I can't really speak to Frozen 2.
Frozen 2 helps it a lot.
But on that point, the whole central relationship of Frozen is the relationship between Anna and Elsa. It's not the traditional Disney princess narrative of the prince and the princess. It's this familial relationship that is the center narrative, and that is the love that saves Anna in the end. Is that love, which it goes back to everything that we were saying of recentering these different kinds of love and affection as part of our lives.
Yes.
Since you bring it up.
Well,
if you want
right.
an ace perspective.
I am looking forward to an ace reading of the Bible series, because there is tea to be served.
Acts Church, just like that, is something that really resonates with, because of the idea of centering your community. And that whole, I think, thing has been really lost in the, at least like white American evangelical church structure that has centered this cis heterosexual relationship as the ideal, with some of those misinterpreted passages from Paul, and like the whole narrative of like the bride of Christ, and sort of like putting marriage up on a pedestal, like, dare I say, idolizing marriage in a specific kind of marriage. That has just really caused a lot of other types of relationships to fall apart and become decentralized and deprioritized.
Yes. Gosh, this has been absolutely wonderful. I'm so appreciative. We got about a minute left. Any hot burning things that you need to say or share before we bring tonight to a close? Go for it, Vaughn.
I just want to say my special interest, and yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. So I say that with cause, is radical feminism and fighting it, and aceness kind of brought me towards that, like looking into that and trying to understand it. It's a deeply transphobic like thought thing, and just really interesting, and it's something that I'm hoping to get to talk about more in the future. And I don't think I would have ended up there without the AcesAro community and learning about that, because they have a grudge against us as well.
I am entirely plotting and scheming and all those kinds of words about a whole queer and neurodivergent intersection conversation on so many levels. So many levels. Team ADHD here, just got diagnosed 2 years ago. So again, thank you. Like, this is, again, these stories are sacred. I anticipate some of you will need great amounts of recharge and quiet and noise canceling headphones and and coming down after this. So I name that to say I so appreciate the willingness to be open and to share. And this is really a blessing to our community. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and to QCF for having us. I forgot how much I like talking about this kind of stuff, so it was a good opportunity to just get back to it, especially because sometimes I question what perspectives I still have to share, because I am a person who is in a relationship. And so what does that say for me as like someone who is aromantic and asexual? But it was nice to get to reconnect with some of that stuff, and to remember the perspectives that are outside of mine as well, and the curiosity that says something I have that I can meet other people's curiosity with. So it was great getting to share with you guys. Thank you.
And I want to know what Dee has to say.
Well, I was going to say it's great to have you together in this talk, because most people have never seen an asexual relationship, and so often when I give talks, I'm the only ace person there, and then someone comes up to me afterwards and they will say, I've never met another ace person. It's really lonely if you haven't found a place to plug in. So having you here, shows people what it could look like, right? one version of what it could look like and what that means and how that works and like how does it make any sense to us. And like that, like you are that like light bulb moment for another person as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I always love getting to hear your perspectives as well, Dee. So this has been great to get to chat with you as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dee. Always words of great wisdom. I'm going to invite Carrie back in to wrap us up for tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to also say thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you for sharing so generously with us, with this community, but also with folks who are new to QCF and might be seeing this video as their kind of entry point into the community. So with much gratitude.